Okay, thank you, Ben and Brian. It's a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon again after a little while. Hope everyone's had a good summer. Looks like fall's upon us. Yeah, we had rain here on the West Coast last night. We're a little bit, which we sorely needed. I haven't heard how things are in Alberta today. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about long-term studies that are supporting mixed wood management in Western Canada. A bit of focusing mostly on more recent history. I won't go back to the studies that were established long ago very much. So both Mike and I will be presenting today. So I don't know, I presume many of you are familiar with mixed wood forests in the Boreal plains and boreal forests of Western Canada. They're composed primarily of mixtures of aspen and white spruce with other species as well thrown into the mix. It's the dominant type on upland sites, certainly in the boreal mixed woods of Alberta, and a lot of across much of the boreal plains. Mixed woods in this region are a really important source of wood fiber and provide both deciduous, mostly aspen, as well as balsam poplar and conifer fiber. They're important to biodiversity. In fact, neotropical songbirds spend a good chunk of time in the spring and a little bit of time in the fall traveling through the mixed wood forests, and many of them nest in mixed wood forests during the spring and summer. We understand and know that productivity and yields are potentially higher in mixture by virtue of mixing the more shade tolerant spruce with the less tolerant aspen. So growing two species together can give us higher yields. Growing them using things like commercial thinning to remove the aspen when it reaches maturity at about age 60, and then leaving the spruce to go on for another 40 to 60 years actually gives an even bigger boost in productivity. So those other non-traditional clear-cut systems or alternatives to clear cutting can boost productivity. Aspen can benefit white spruce through reducing things like leader weevil damage, reducing frost injury in young plantations, and suppressing the growth of blue giant reedgrass, which is a serious competitor for white spruce in this region. Okay, and mixed woods may be more resilient than pure stands to things like climate events, insect and disease events, and by virtue of having two species, we may have a little less risk than just having one species. Yeah, mixed woods, what we generally view as a mixed stand typically occurs in a middle age range, mid-successional window, age 60 to 140, with younger stands being aspen dominated with spruce in the understory, or with spruce regenerating early on. And as stands as sites get old, we see increasing conifer dominance. And if some disturbance happens, insect outbreak or other event, we can see a reversion to young aspen. Sometimes, particularly if it's a pure aspen stand as it gets very old. Yeah, the spruce aspen mixed wood structure naturally develops over time, as this indicates. Under management, if we want to do this in a short time frame, 100 years or less, then we may need to speed up development towards the later successional stage. And the big issue here is the spruce component, because the aspen component generally reaches culmination age and maturity in the 60 to 80 year window. A number of options have been tried for managing boreal mixed wood stands. And here I'm focusing on mixed woods, growing mixtures, and not just focusing on growing the spruce. So regeneration early tending treatments include mechanical site prep, planting spruce, leaving aspen for natural regeneration, which is generally the case. Herbicide use is broadcast, patch, or spot radial treatments. Spot brushing, using brush saws, cutting tools. Pre-commercial thinning. Commercial thinning with understory protection, and partial cutting options of shelter wood and selection systems. We'll talk a little bit about some examples of those. So today I'm going to focus on long-term studies that are looking at quantifying effects of stand composition and silviculture on long-term stand dynamics. As Brian mentioned, we're in the process of a needs analysis for FGrOW, looking at Mixedwood management research needs. So we wanted to summarize as part of that what we have already in the ground. So we're focusing today on projects that have been active during the past 10 to 15 years with treatment areas that are large enough to support medium and long-term studies, and which generally include permanent sample plots that are more than 0.04 hectares in size, so more than 20 by 20 meters or some appropriate dimensions. Focus of a lot of our presentation is on studies supported by FGrOW, and plus also pulled in some information on studies done by the CFS, the Government of Alberta, University of Alberta, and some folks in BC. So we apologize if we've missed any, and we'll welcome input for additions to the list. Okay, long-term studies are really valuable in the boreal forest because trees grow slowly. Anybody who's worked in the boreal knows that things happen much more slowly than in the temperate regions. And interactions and resulting dynamics may change over time, and particularly when we look at things like climate change being overlain on top of stand development. We can have all kinds of dynamics going on. And stands may be vulnerable at particular ages, particular stages, particular characteristics to things like drought and other events. So long-term studies with regular measurements provide valuable information on how these changes influence stands in both the short and long term. Okay, so continuing to monitor and measure these could be very valuable for things like climate adaptation of our forests. And long-term data are useful in calibration and validation of growth models and in development of models. But we do have to consider the cost of establishment, particularly where we have these large-ish measurement plots. We generally need large-ish treatment plots, and we want to remeasure these things and maintain these things periodically. So that all costs money. So we have to be cognizant of that. Okay, so with that as an introduction, I'll pass the presentation over to Mike to talk about the first study we're going to discuss, which is the WESBOGY long-term study. Mike?
Thank you, Phil. So thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity. So today I'm just going to focus on the WESBOGY long-term study and try to provide you some insight into the project and highlight some of the results and hopefully acknowledge its value. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through, in some cases some of the slides will be wordy, but I'm going to avoid talking about exactly everything. So the reason that WESBOGY was established, the long-term study, was to advance our understanding of the dynamics of mixedwood stands. It was initiated in 1990 and essentially we planted spruce in just recent clear cuts. After about 5 years, they went ahead and they thinned to treatment densities and continued to measure them beginning at time 1 and on, and I think we're up getting close to year 30 now. Next slide, Phil. So the distribution of the WESBOGY plots are quite broad. We have plots in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Northwest Territories, which gives us a really broad look at different regions. So thanks. Next slide, please. So essentially, it's a randomized complete block design. So every agency has one block. We have 11 locations. So each agency supports one block, and in the block is essentially 2 installations. We want to have one on the high site, one have on the median site, and within each installation we have 2 replications. On each replication is essentially 15 plots, and the plots are designed as a combination of white spruce aspen mixtures. Okay, on the top of that, the bottom image, you can see the aspen is treatment densities are from 0, 200, 500, 1500, 4000 in natural, and the spruce densities are 1000, 500, and 0. And each plot is, we often talk about plots, and if you say plot 1, you actually know that this is a 0-1000 combination. So next slide, please. So this is one installation. I believe this is the Mercer. It's a false color infrared leaf off, and you can see there's actually 2 replications in here, and you can see the randomized design. Next slide, please. So the WESBOGY plots are 200 by 200, broken down into 4 quadrants. The treated plots have are handled as a complete plot. So it's really a 20 meter by 20 meter plot with a 5 meter buffer. The image that you see here is of the natural plots, which are 6, 12, and 15. Because of the high densities of aspen, we needed to do a nested plot design. So initially in the bottom left corner, you see that there's 4 1x1s. Those were measured for the first about 10, 11 years. Then it got expanded to the 2x2. And then, and now at year about 20, we're at 5x5s. And sometime in the future, they're going to be expanded to the full plot. And that's, again, just for the naturally unthinned plots. Okay, next slide. So in support of the long-term study, we have the long-term study manual. It basically goes right through from establishing it, the measurement protocols, and the database maintenance. It's very prescriptive because everybody, as you'll see in the next slide, is on a different schedule. So it's really important to keep track of everybody and give them very, very explicit directions on what's supposed to be done at what year. In addition, that it is also what consultants and people measuring the plots are using. So we also maintain a long-term study database. It's an access database. It's maintained at the U of A. The members, they collect their data and submit the data to us. We go through a detailed error checking process, which usually goes for a few rounds until we get everything clean. And members can access the data through an online portal. On that portal, you can actually see shared data. The manuals are all there, reports and publications. So currently our database has 763,000 individual tree measurements over the life of the study. We also maintain a WESBOGY website, which documents and talks a lot about the long-term study in detail, and there's the link below. Okay, so the current measurement status for the WESBOGY is, on the left column are the agencies that are participating. You'll notice that in the second column, establishment years, even within an agency, vary. So it is a job to keep everybody straight and doing the right thing at the right time. We can see in the third column the measurement year, or the next measurement, and that is kind of, we refer to as measurement year, and that links right back to the manual. And then from that we can tell exactly what they're supposed to do at, say, year 21, for example. And then the last column actually is important because you can see that the measurement schedule varies. Initially it was 1, then it went to biannual, and then every 3 years, and now After age 26, we're at a 5-year. Next slide, please. So under the long-term study, initially there were basically 4 questions that were asked. Natural aspen mortality on untreated plots. We needed to get a handle of that. That's plot 6, 12, and 15. We also needed to, or interested in, understanding the effects of aspen treatment density on aspen growth and yield, and then aspen treatment effect on spruce growth and yield. And then this whole question about what are the implications for long-term yield? Next slide, please. So to answer the first question, we were measuring the unthinned, or the natural plot 6, 12, and 15 for the first 20 years on an annual basis. And this was specific so that we could get a handle on mortality. As you can see early on, stands establish at very, very large, there's a lot of variation on establishment. But what's interesting is that by about age 20, all stands, or most stands, are somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 stems per hectare. Even those that were starting off at maybe 7,000 stems per hectare, they tended to maintain and have very low mortality. The importance of this is that from a growth modeling perspective, if you think about predicting future densities in these juvenile stands, this data was just essential in fitting the equations for mortality, specifically juvenile mortality in MGM. Next slide, please. So the next question was aspen effect on aspen. And so we did this study at age 10, or we looked at this at age 10, and we didn't see much, there wasn't a lot of differentiation. But at age 20, or between 19 and 24, we're starting to see some really strong, significant responses to aspen on aspen. So in this analysis, you'll see that we're going to focus on the 8 oldest. Okay, next slide. So it is a mixed model Anova. The key of this slide is to say, or to acknowledge, that we're looking at fixed effects, we're looking at random effects, and we're also acknowledging the interaction between those 2 effects. Next slide, please. So in this slide, these are the results, and you can see you can see that on, we'll go to this way. We'll say these are the parameters we're most interested in: height, diameter, slenderness, crown width, and so on. So what you see in the bolded lines is that aspen treatment density is actually significant for all of these. And that means that there is a treatment effect. There are at least one of the treatments is different than the others. We also note that there is an installation treatment effect that's starting to show, and this treatment effect there, we believe, is location starting to creep in here. What was notable is slenderness is really at year 10 when we did this Anova. Slenderness was the first parameter that was showing some significant difference. So I'm already, keen on believing that we're going to start seeing more coming out under the installation location. The chart at the bottom is essentially for the different treatments, what are the heights, the diameters, and so on. I'm not going to do it here or talk about it a lot here because I have it in a slide that's a little easier to get a grasp of. So if I could have the next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is the top left is top height, top right is top DBH, and the bottom is top slenderness. So essentially the letters indicate groupings. And what we see is we have, as aspen essentially gets, as aspen treatment density increases, we're seeing heights increase. So in essence, the shortest trees are in the 200s. So, I mean, that's just basically the result. And it's in a group with the 200, 500s, and with 1500s. Okay, if we look at DBH, what we see is as Aspen treatment density increases, DBH decreases. On the next slide, or the next panel, you see slenderness. As Aspen density increases, slenderness increases. And these are all pretty intuitive. Okay, next slide. When we talk about Aspen merch volume, we're actually talking about volume, individual tree volume, as well as density together. And although the trees that are in the 200 are bigger based on diameter, stem numbers are starting to play a role in here, where we're getting the maximum or the most merch volume out of the 500 and the 1500. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at what the Aspen effect is on spruce, what we see is a similar trend where the Aspen treatment densities are all significant for the different parameters. And we're also seeing that the spruce planting density, this is between the 500 and the 1000, is beginning to creep in there in slenderness and in DBH. The significance of this is that initially the trees, the spruce, were too small to have intraspecific competition. But now we're at age 20, we're starting to get canopy closure with the spruce. And so there is an intraspecific competition effect, something we haven't seen up to now. And so I think that's where the Aspen effect and the spruce effect are going to become different, and the model is going to get more complex as we move forward. Similarly, the chart at the bottom is the actual parameter values, but I have those in charts as well. So if we get into the next slide. Okay, essentially, this is the spruce diameter. As Aspen density goes up, top height goes decreases. As Aspen density increases, diameter goes down, and slenderness goes up. Next slide. So to give you a visual perspective here is 1,000 spruce at 0 Aspen versus 1,500 Aspen versus natural. So the leaf area is significantly different. Next, please. Okay, I'm going to go through this fairly quick. We're writing a new manuscript for the long-term study. So this is a mixed modeling approach. We're looking at repeated measurement analysis. We're really interested in understanding height, diameter for both Aspen and spruce. We're using all plots over all ages, and the fixed effects is basically Aspen treatment density, and the random effects are intercept and Aspen age and white spruce age. Next slide. So the idea here is, this is all the plots for Aspen height over time, is to try to make sense of this. Next slide. And so this is, oh, you went too fair, Phil. Oh, there we go. So the key here is this is similar to the bar charts that we saw. The key is that Aspen height in the 200 is significantly different than the other different treatments. So with the 4,000 having the highest and going down to the natural, and then at the bottom is white spruce, is the 200. Next slide, please. We see the same trend in the bar graphs earlier. 500 and 200 for diameter is the largest diameter trees. It goes down to 1,500, 4,000, and then the naturals at the bottom, and they're significantly lower. Okay, for spruce height, you can see that spruce height is really not affected until we get down into the naturals, and where the spruce height is significantly lower. The rest are grouped pretty tight. Next slide, please. If we look at DBH for spruce over time, you can see that's where the differentiation is. And clearly we start at 0. Aspen is the largest, and as aspen density goes down, spruce diameter goes down, and it's a notable trend. Okay, next slide, please. So for the long-term projections, which is kind of a changing gears here, the importance of the long-term study is it's fully enumerated data. And if you look at the columns 1 through 6, that is the 1,000 with the 1,000 spruce with the different aspen densities. You can see the total MAIs coming from, and this is modeled with MGM out to rotation. You can see the contribution for conifer and deciduous and the total. And so this again was part of what we wanted to know, is what is the sweet spot? What is the right combination between white spruce and aspen to maximize MAI or meet our management objectives? So interesting. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all the conclusions. I know we've got lots of material to cover, but I did want to highlight that the long-term study is fully enumerated. Many studies don't start at time 1 at the beginning, which is at year 1. They always start later. We have data right going back to time 1. It's important for validation. It's important for model development. And now as this study gets older, it's going to be essential or integral in being able to understand the effects of aspen and spruce together. And I guess the last point is there's lots of other studies that are now starting to work on WESBOGY websites as well. Next slide, please. Phil, can you go? There we go. I'm not going to go through the publications, but they're referenced here, and then we'll be passing this off as a PDF. So there are referee journals, publications that are specific to the long-term study, and they're listed here. Next slide. As well as other papers that are not refereed, as well as an acknowledgement of the graduate students that have used the long-term study for their thesis. So.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's it for me.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Mike mentioned a number of ancillary studies. So one thing that we had the opportunity to do with the Big River remeasurement a couple years ago was to look at some wood properties. So looking at branch diameters and number of live branches, and basically, to cut to the chase, aspen density influenced branch diameter for the branches at 1 meter height on the spruce. Aspen density didn't significantly influence the number of branches in the world closest to 1 meter height, but spruce density did. So the higher spruce densities resulted in fewer branches. So we're seeing that kind of thing, and this paper goes into a whole lot of detail about relating to a whole bunch of measurements that we took. Also looking at climate effects. So with Big River data, we did some coring of trees outside in the treated buffer outside the measurement plots, and the relation annual growth in basal area is related to initial basal area of the tree, so what it was at the beginning of the growth period, the amount of overtopping aspen basal area in the plot, and the climate moisture index, which basically calculates a water balance based on temperature and growing season precipitation. So as CMI increases, we're getting more and more effective moisture. So as the climate warms, we actually generally see a decline in CMI if precipitation remains constant. So that turned out significant, even though it looks pretty shallow with the scale in this graph. So some trends showing. And those trends show for aspen as well as for spruce, with the same variables coming out as being significant. A couple years ago, we developed a collaborative project with the University of Quebec in Montreal and several other universities across the country to establish a project called Smart Forest Canada, with the aim of improving our understanding of how climate and stand characteristics influence microclimate, tree growth, and climate change adaptation options with mixed woods. So we've instrumented 10 of the WESBOGY long-term study installations with a weather station, and then a microclimate station in the understory of 4 plots to measure air and soil temperature, soil moisture, relative humidity, and light. So the associated questions are listed there, and you can read those later. So the 10 WESBOGY installations, we've installed the equipment to get as broad a geographic distribution as we could. Okay, so that was the WESBOGY long-term study. In 2008, the Mixed Management Association of Alberta initiated an experiment that's similar to the WESBOGY long-term study, except that the treatments are applied at age 17. The thinning treatments are applied at age 17 and 22, and by virtue of the age, they established a much narrower range of densities. So the purpose of the dynamic aspen density experiment, or DADE, is to look at the effects of aspen density on stand development, examine effects on survival and growth of spruce, and evaluate how we can optimize white spruce survival and growth. So, and the trade-off of removing the aspen in the process. So there were 7 installations established in 17-year-old stands and 7 in 22-year-old stands in areas that had been planted and still had about 1,000 stems per hectare of spruce. And the aspen blocks were selected with aspen densities of at least 6,000 stems per hectare pre-treatment. Yeah, no, the blocks had been planted soon after harvesting, so we weren't dealing with older sites that had time for vegetation to grow and things to develop. And yeah, and following planting, no further silvicultural treatments, like no tending up to experiment establishment. So 5 treatment densities, all aspen removed, 0 stems per hectare, thin to 1,000, thin to 2,500, thin to 5,000, and an unthinned control. Okay, and where spruce densities were far in excess of 1,000 stems per hectare and spruce were clumpy, there was some thinning of the spruce to clean up the plots a bit. Okay, yeah, and the study uses a randomized block design. Okay, the general distribution, this doesn't show the 22 blocks because some were clustered together here, but this gives you an idea of how they're distributed across Alberta. They're all on mesic medium ecosites. So the list of the 22 or 14 installations, some were established and lost due to accidental overspraying. Yeah, one just recently burned, so it won't make it to the year 23 measurement, and one has a slightly odd installation 17.2 was Martini plowed, so it's a little different from the others, though we didn't really pick up much in the analysis of the data. Treatment plots were at least 50 by 50 meters. There was a main measurement plot that was 20 by 20 with a subplot for measuring the deciduous. It was 10 by 10. Major findings: aspen densities didn't affect survival of spruce from the initiation of the trial to the subsequent measurements. 8 years after thinning, the diameter of the dominant aspen was increased, but there was no effect on aspen height growth. So similar to what Mike was telling us, for the early on initial results about 10 years out. Spruce height and diameter growth increased with thinning intensity and continued to increase with time after treatment. There some evidence of a bit of an adjustment period for spruce height growth during the first 3 years after thinning, sort of reflecting a shift in growth to diameter over height, particularly that was most evident with the 0 aspen density. We did yield projections with MGM. The sweet spot, again, seemed to be the 1,000 aspen density, thinned at age 17, with the age 22 being a little bit lower. Okay, but the 2,500 is only, and 5,000 are only slightly behind, and the control is just a little bit further behind. Treatments all reduced deciduous yields, which are shown in that turquoise color there. Oh, sorry, no, sorry. Ignore that. This is conifer yield. This is deciduous yield. So we can grow mixtures with the addition of deciduous on top of conifer. We're seeing a decline in conifer yield with increasing deciduous densities. Okay, so Dade. In 2002, in collaboration with Doug Pitt, Milo Mihailovich, and Dan McIsaac, we developed this Judy Creek Mixedwood experiment, which we've taken tours to on several occasions, and some of you may have visited it on your own or with others. The objective was to look at the potential effects of spot herbicide treatments using glyphosate or triclopyr in combination with pre-commercial thinning in comparison to more typical broadcast treatments. So there are 17 treatments in total that we established across 40 treatment plots. Treatment plots were 35 meter by 35 meters or 45 meters by 45 meters, both with 25 meter by 25 meter measurement plots. And then subplots established within those. The Judy Creek Mixedwood experiment was measured initially, right at the beginning, right after planting, in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then at 5-year intervals at years 10 and 15, with a plan going forward, hopefully to measure it at age 20 and 25. Two papers. There's a paper in 2010, but the most recent published paper was published in 2015. There's the citation there, and we're currently working on a paper presenting year 15 results. Okay, so there's the 17 treatments. We've got broadcast treatments, broadcast complete using glyphosate, broadcast woody only control using directed basal bark application of triclopyr herbicide, and a broadcast herbaceous control, which is not really an operational treatment, where we tried to remove the understory herb and shrub layer without damaging the aspen, and we were reasonably effective at doing so, although we caused a little bit of damage in the first year when the aspen were short. But subsequent to that, the broadcast herbaceous doesn't look much different from the untreated. Okay, radial treatments, 2-meter radius for all the radial treatments. Woody control used triclopyr, so it was only targeting the woody vegetation, and complete control used glyphosate herbicide applied in the 2-meter radius around the planting spots initially, and then around the planted trees. We also tried 2 years of vegetation control using glyphosate versus 4. Okay, and then at year 10, we created a range of densities from unthinned 2,000, 1,200, and 800 stems per hectare thinnings within each of these radial treatments. There was an untreated with spruce planted, and then there was an untreated without spruce. It was just a pure aspen plot. Okay, so details on the treatments are there. There's a quick view of the plot layout. So the bigger treatment plots, measurement plots that are 25 by 25, and then the subplots where aspen densities and aspen measurements were completed in plots that hadn't been thinned or prior to thinnings. An aerial view of the site. some pictures. So here's herbaceous control, what it looked like at age 11. Once we got the herbaceous under control, it seems to have persisted. The control certainly persisted through age 15, 16, the last time I was there. It's had an enduring effect. Once we got rid of all the understory, that's persisted. Yeah. Woody control initially created a field of Calamagrostis, which is odd because this is a Mizaki site, but we had in the first few years fairly tall Calamagrostis, and it's still around, but the spruce has come through it fairly well. Here's the radial complete treatment, so two years of glyphosate application without thinning, with the spruce at the center of the spot. Okay, then a radial complete, 4 years of radial complete, plus a thinning to 1,200 stems per hectare. And this was the year after the thinning was applied. We noticed across the site, in some cases, some of the spruce were leaning. So conclusions so far, radial treatments did effectively improve survival and growth of white spruce. Okay, but spruce did best in the complete control, the broadcast complete control in the open. Spruce survival was better in radial treatments than in either the broadcast complete or the woody control, but was also much lower in the untreated. Radial treatments effectively reduced the aspen density to about half of what it had started as, but we didn't really see a thinning effect from the 50% removal, because aspen were still crowded in the areas in between where the spot treatments hadn't been applied. Thinning at age 10 then, however, reduced aspen density in basal area and led to a significant increase in DBH of the top 400 aspen trees, but didn't significantly affect height. So similar to what Mike was showing for WESBOGY. Yeah, details, I already summarized that. We did install smart forest microclimate stations at Judy Creek in 11 plots. Okay, the next study, something that's been called the banding study, which was funded initiated with support from the Mixed Management Association and the partner companies that were involved in this study: Alpac, Alberta Plywood, DMI, Vanderwell, and Weyerhaeuser. So the study was designed to evaluate and demonstrate potential use of patch and banding treatments in mechanical site preparation for regenerating mixed wood stands. We measured, it's been measured at year 1, 3, 6, and 10 with a hope of measurements in the future. The studies established 5 locations, established between 2006 and 2008. Treatment plots were 60 by 80 meters or bigger, made that large to accommodate mechanical site preparation equipment to allow turnaround outside the plots, etc. PSPs, 30 meter by 30 meter, were established. Trees are tagged. Then aspen, most of the aspen assessments were done in 3.99 meter radius assessment plots. Okay, so measured years 1, 3, 6, and 10 with future measurements, hopefully at about 5-year intervals. Yeah, so the locations, it's established at 5 locations in Alberta. There were 11 treatments, although not all treatments are present at all sites. So there was mounding with thinning, mounding with radial brushing, a 2 meter radius of cutting. Mary Crusher was applied to 2 of the sites in a 15 meter wide band. We had mounding with glyphosate application, and mounding without any follow-up treatments. Okay, similar set without mounding, unmounded with thinning, unmounded with radial brushing, unmounded with glyphosate, and then an unmounded control. We also on three sites tried arsenal, imazapyr herbicide site prep treatments in spots and planting spots, and arsenal in the 15 meter wide band. within the plots. So the banded plots were 15 meters of treated and 15 meters of untreated. So here, what a mound looked like at about year 3. They're generally fairly small mounds. They were all created using TerraTech or similar mounders. The arsenal spots, they held up pretty good for the first 3 or 4 years. So still some evidence here of the spot at the flag there at year 3. Here's the arsenal band at year 3. So pretty severe, pretty heavy aggressive control, but we are seeing ingrowth. We're seeing vegetation coming in. It didn't hold permanently, but really good aspen control. The glyphosate band, one year post application, so that the glyphosate treatment was held off to about age 5 or 6 across most of the sites. And the Mary Crusher at year 10 on this site created a lot of Calamagrostis, but you can see the spruce are keeping up with it nicely. And we also have the spot radial brushing treatment here, so cutting the vegetation in a 2-meter radius circle around each of our selected 400 spruce per hectare to see what happens. So this was done based on results from a trial that we did north of Fawcett Lake in 2000, where we found we're looking at triclopyr radial treatments. We did a cutting treatment and found that cutting by itself could give effective control of aspen without much suckering and with really limited height regrowth of the aspen. So the idea is to keep a wall of aspen around your treated spot that then maintains apical dominance and or because of its shading influence and effects on soil temperature results in reduced aspen regrowth after cutting. So worked pretty good at Mista High. Then we've done subsequent experiments with the radial brushing, spot brushing, and it seems to work pretty good and is about as effective as the herbicide treatments at Judy Creek, it seems. Oh yeah, the untreated. Okay, yeah, so we're seeing effects of treatments on spruce. So spruce height and root collar diameter are best in the mounded plus glyphosate. Absolutely no surprise. We would expect that based on the history of site prep and herbicide trials. Mounding plus glyphosate and arsenal all gave significant increases in tree diameter over untreated, and the other treatments are intermediate at age 6. Okay, yeah, and we're seeing effects on deciduous densities and aspen diameters. So, yeah, most treatments other than mounding, untreated, and arsenal spot, where we've left a lot of aspen untreated. All the other treatments have suppressed aspen density, diameter, and aspen height. We've installed some microclimate stations in banding installation in selected banding installations. Okay, so another study established by yours truly with Milo's excellent assistance. The project was established in Tolko High Levels territory in their turf with funding provided by Tolko, mostly using their free dollars. So the objective was to examine what happens if we create different size of openings, treat different areas of ground using vision herbicides. So it goes back to an old idea that Bob Sutton had proposed back in the 60s called cluster planting, so treating patches. So here, using a pulse spray technology, it was boom on and off solenoid switch. We could dial in different sized patches. So we did this in a 12-year-old plantation located 80 kilometers northeast of High Level. Okay, so it was established in 2007. We measured it in 2008, 2010, 13, and 18, and hopefully 5 years after that. Yeah, we're seeing some really cool trends. So the spruce in the treated areas, treated patches, are all responding quite nicely. A very small but not terribly significant effect of opening size, okay, with the larger openings tending to be showing slightly better height growth of spruce than the smaller ones. Okay, and this is the untreated area in between the treated patches for each of these treatments. They're all color-coded to match. So the untreated area is showing slightly lower growth. Okay, we effectively treated between 30 and 36% of the area in each block. We're targeting 40 or more. The size of treatment patches didn't have significant effects on spruce size. One of the interesting things that we found was that spruce in the untreated matrix in these treated blocks were still significantly larger than spruce in blocks that had been left completely untreated. So there was an increase in light, an increase in space as a result of the areas that had been treated that was having effects on the spruce in the adjacent untreated matrix. Aspen density in the untreated matrix was about in the untreated was 49,000 stems per hectare to begin with, and densities dropped to 10,300 and a bit more. Yeah, with the last measurement. Understory protection, another important treatment for mixedwood management, important option for mixedwood management, described nicely in this paper by Grover et al. From 2014. There is a reference. The Mixedwood Management Association initiated an understory protection trial to look at and obtain data on understory spruce growth after overstory removal with strip cut harvesting, and on aspen regeneration and growth in the machine corridors and removal areas. Okay, the SCUP design has been established in 18 blocks. Total was established in 18 blocks between 2005 and 2007. Yeah, somewhat limited range to control variability of ecosite, soil moisture regime, soil nutrient regime, and other things. So, and the dots show the distribution of the SCUP installations that have been installed. Those 18 blocks. Okay, so the design, there's 92. So there's plot clusters within each of those 92 blocks. There's two to six plot clusters per block. They're supposed to be measured at 5-year intervals. There was a change in the protocol in 2013 based on experiences from the beginning. So some modifications. So in the main change in 2013 was the addition of top height trees for aspen and spruce to get site index estimates. Yeah, so an overhead view of the van der Waals SCUP block. Okay, so SCUP plot cluster, the width of a plot cluster is either 8 or 6, sorry, length. Since it's side to side, I keep thinking of this as width, but this is length. So it could 8 or 16 meters, which depends on the buffer size. So 8 is used when buffers are wider than 10 meters, and 16 is used when buffers are less than 10 meters wide. These are sapling subplots that are 2 meters in this direction. Okay, and then they occupy the removal plot is split into 2, so that this length is slightly variable. Okay, so these total plot cluster sizes range from 150 meters squared to 463 meters squared. And then outside at the end, there's these age plots set up where aspen and spruce ages are and height measurements are collected to help determine site index. Okay, so fairly decent sized plots for many of the measurements. Yeah, so there's the 18 installations, their establishment year, when measurements were taken. Key findings were just Ivan Bielanovic, myself, Brian Roth, and Sharon Meredith are just working on a manuscript to summarize results. There is a report that hasn't been generally released, but it's available if you would really like to see it. There's so far no differences in spruce growth were evident between removal and buffer areas. So in other words, the removal of the aspen in the retention areas did increase spruce growth in both the removal and buffer areas. Spruce height increment during the second 5-year period, ages 5 to 10, increased about 3 times that observed in the first period. So there was some delay in height increment, a lag due to spruce reallocating growth to diameter and becoming a little more sturdy during that first 5-year period. Diameter increment, however, increased immediately after overstory removal and increased a further 25% from age 5 to 10 during the age 5 to 10 period. Aspen saplings were slightly more abundant in the removal area, so that's the area where the spruce had been left, than in the extraction area at age 10. Perhaps largely because there was less ground disturbance than in the extraction trail. But there's substantial variation in aspen densities between blocks. And aspen sapling density was just under 7,000 stems per hectare in the buffer area. So we're seeing aspen regeneration in those narrow buffers with the retained older aspen. Yeah, so at age 10, some range in spruce sapling densities was observed, and then MGM projections were made out to outwards to give MGM estimates of yields of 105 cubic meters for deciduous and 168 cubic meters per hectare for conifer out about 70 years after the understory protection removal. Yeah. Okay, so remeasurements plans. So here, this image shows a very dramatic release response of white spruce following overstory removal. The removal happened in 2005. We've got an immediate diameter response that year. Anyway, smart forests there. Another understory protection type study was established by the CFS at Hotchkiss River in 1992 with the objective of evaluating the effects of harvesting patterns on wind throw risk and as well as on growth of spruce and aspen. Okay, so it was a stand with a 90-year-old aspen, and the paper says it's a 60-year-old understory of white spruce. Treatments, they tried 1 and 2 pass modified uniform shelter woods, so 2 and 3 pass strip shelter woods, 2 pass alternate strip shelter woods, a 4 pass progressive strip shelter woods. So there, yeah, anyway, so a fair number of treatments there. You can appreciate, the effort required to do this is for these kinds of studies. You need fairly large blocks and yeah, a fair bit of effort to get this all set up. So they had 19 treatment blocks with each harvesting treatment applied to 1 block, except for the clear cut, which was applied in 3 blocks, and the 4 control plots that were established. Okay, so the other treatments were in 1 block each. Measurements were collected using a 5-meter wide belt transect established across the width of each treatment block, where trees above 1.3 meters in height were tagged and measured. They were measured pre-harvest and then measured post-harvest, 5, 10, 15, and 10 years after. Yeah, I understand there were measurements done at year 20 also. So 10-year measurements are reported in this 2009 paper by McIsaac and Krieger, and I'm told that there's a report in preparation based on the 20-year measurements. So there's an overview image of the Hotchkiss Mixedwood trial, aerial view. Yeah. you can look at that at your leisure. Hotchkiss key findings: wind throw reduction was best with a single entry harvest with a 35-meter removal strip and 5-meter wide buffer and machine corridors, with machine corridors on 20-meter centers. Okay, wind throw increased when removal area width exceeded 2.5 times the height of the canopy, or when it exceeded 75 meters at Hotchkiss. And this study demonstrates again that spruce that are taller than 7 meters require good wind buffers, or wind throw becomes a serious problem. There seemed to be a threshold actually at 7.5 meters height. Yeah, as another version of the understory protection idea was established by Derek Sitters with collaboration with Vic Liefers and others in 2005, 2006 at 4 locations, designed to test some options for managing mature aspen stands with an understory spruce and provide a bigger network of sites. So in this study, they compared evenly distributed removal maintenance of an evenly distributed overstory through thinning throughout the area, except for the extraction trails, versus the concentrated wind buffer idea that we see at Hotchkiss and see in Scott. Yeah, so that was established in 2005-06. Okay, at four locations. So again, using the 5-meter wide belt transects to measure things. Yeah, there were measurements taken pre-harvest and post-harvest, and year 7 measurements collected at the Grand Prairie site, but none of the others have been measured beyond the post-harvest measurements. There have been sort of field visits and observations, but beyond that, no detailed complete sets of measurements. So key findings, according to Derek, that evenly distributed overstory is most successful for aspen recovery, and we're seeing the best spruce release response and the best blowdown protection in this evenly distributed overstory that retained 10 to 15% of the aspen basal area. Okay, yeah, quickly, I'm running out of time here. There's obviously lots to review, and this document, as we said, will be available. So some older studies. So back in the 1950s, a number of studies were established, and I'm aware of some going back before that as well, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan in particular. Yeah, and this reported by Yang, Richard Yang in 1989, looking at growth responses of white spruce to release from aspen. So eight sites in Saskatchewan, and 7 sites in Saskatchewan, one in Manitoba. Yeah, so treatment plots with a 20-meter by 20-meter PSPs, had all the aspen removed, plus there were untreated controls. So yeah, most recent measurements, I believe, were done in 2002 by Dan McIsaac, but there is no published report as far as I can find on this study. And there's also a similar study established in the Duck Mountains that Yang mentions in his 1989 paper. A number of underplanting trials were established. So the CFS and Government of Alberta, I believe, was involved in it. Established a number of underplanting trials. This is one photo of one of them, one of my favorite photos from, I think it's the Marlborough area near Edson. Yeah, where underplanting was done underneath an aspen stand. Many of these are still intact. So there's some I know near Calling Lake as well, where spruce were underplanted under aspen stands. Alpac, Gita Grover, initiated a number of underplanting trials to look at the potential for putting spruce into an aspen stand, and for future work at removing the aspen and protecting understory spruce. And a paper by Jim Stewart et al. Also presents results from an experiment where I think at least some of those study sites are still in existence. A big study that most people in Alberta, I'm sure, are aware of is the EMEND study, Ecosystem Management Emulating Natural Disturbance, established by the University of Alberta and CFS. So it started in 1998 under the leadership of John Spence and Jan Volney, with help from a crew of many. Yeah, and they established 100 compartments, at least about each of about 10 hectares, representing a range of boreal mixedwood forest types, from pure broadleaf to pure conifer, with the mixtures in between. Okay, so they looked at effects of levels of retention at 2% retention, or basically clear cut, 10%, 20%, 50%, and 75%, as well as leaving an unharvested control. In a fully replicated experimental design. As well, there was a slash burn done in the 10% retention, and a prescribed burn for some unharvested blocks. And 6 PSPs were put into each of these units of the treatment. Pre-harvest, they were remeasured in 99, 2001, 2004, 5, 2009, 10, and 2014, 15. And we've also recently instrumented a number of 54 of the PSPs under the Smart Forest project to look at effects of retention and stand structure on microclimate and how that links to tree growth. Yeah, what can I say? So that yeah, there's some results coming. There's certainly been a number of papers on the effects of retention and biodiversity. Not really anything that I'm aware of in terms of growth and yield types of stuff, but lots on insects, which of course were the project leaders' interests at the time. That Ellen McDonald and Charles Knock are also doing a number of interesting things at EMEND now. As part of EMEND, mechanical site prep treatments were applied in selected plots, and the paper by Vic Liefers, Derek Sitters, Tim Keddy, Kevin Soleric, and Peter Blanis from 2019 looks at combining site prep with retention of the deciduous canopy. Or conifer canopy. So in three retention levels, three site prep treatments and a control were tried. So there's mounding, mixing, and scalping that could be compared to the control. Spruce, so treatments were applied, and spruce were planted in 1999. Individual trees were tagged for remeasurement. So to my understanding, there isn't really a fixed area plot in these, but that might be possible. Yeah, okay. So that kind of focused on a number of studies in Alberta. I'm sure we've missed a bunch, so people can add to this list as we get into further discussion about them. So a bunch of studies have been done in BC, basically in the same general forest type, in the mixed woods region, the boreal plains in northeastern BC. So a lot of them have involved Richard Kabzems, who many of us know and have worked with regularly. So the group Shelterwood experiment was established by Kabzems between 1996 and 1998. Studied at effects of opening diameter on regeneration and on growth of planted spruce. Okay, a study parallel to the WESBOGY long-term study. It was a study established in 1989 by a fellow named Dave Coopersmith in the Fort St. John area at Siphon Creek and Bear Mountain, which Richard, Mike, myself, and Dan reported on in 2016. So the Aspen densities, 0,000, 2,000, 5,000, and that should be 10,000, not 1,000, on spruce and aspen growth and on yield. So yeah, So that's there. That's been maintained, and potential for future measurements there if to expand the range of sites. An underplanting study near Fort Nelson, again established by Dave Coopersmith in 1991. Okay, to look at underplanting. Fertilization was also tried. So underplanting has worked pretty good. There was thinnings tried. It was results indicate that thinning did not help the underplanted spruce at all, because it basically gave the vegetation the light and resources it needed. So the shrubs and grass became a problem early on. Over time, that might change as the spruce gets above the understory vegetation. Fertilization was also tried, largely to see if it had any benefits to the aspen, but it certainly didn't benefit the spruce over the in subsequent time periods. Okay, so there's also a Fort Nelson growing space study, which is established in 2001 to test the effectiveness of spot and broadcast control of aspen in a planned intimate mixture. So this has parallels to Judy Creek. In fact, Judy Creek kind of follows from this. And I mentioned the Mixedwood study, which was established at about the same time, and we had actually been in discussions between BC and Alberta on building things that had some parallels. So complete aspen removal across entire plots, using brush saws, using herbicides, then these manual spot treatments, 1.2 meters, and a chemical spot treatment, and just a simple spacing and an untreated control. Okay, there is a paper from 2011. There's a new paper just being prepared for publication by these guys. Yeah, I really need to stop. So I didn't want to leave out some general herbicide trials with a spruce focus. So these aren't really Mixedwood experiments. These are herbicide experiments to look at options. So near Calling Lake, we established a study to look in 2004 to look at the effects of 1 and 2 applications of glyphosate in comparison to an untreated control. So yeah. So some different combinations using a randomizing complete block design, plots of measurement plots that were 30 meters by 30 meters in size for the main plots. So here, images, the untreated, treated with 1 herbicide treatment in 2006 and treated with 2 herbicide treatments in 2006. One of the obvious things jumps out right at you, and you don't even have to look at the data. So lots of aspen, some aspen, virtually no aspen with 2 treatments. That's been shown by other studies across the country. Yeah, we looked at richness and biodiversity indexes and understory vegetation, total species list. We didn't find real differences between the treated and untreated. Yeah, so yeah, and another study that's been recently remeasured, version of it has been remeasured, was a study originally done by Doug Pitt, Milo Mihailovich, and Leslie Proudfoot, and published in 2004, where they measured 12 herbicide monitoring installations that had pairs of treated and untreated plots that were of sufficient size to work with, and they established subplots in each for measurement. So they provide some interesting information on what herbicide treatments achieve and what their impacts are going forward. So yeah, so that was done, and those have been some of those have been reestablished and recently remeasured in this paper, I understand, or report in preparation. So to wrap up, a lot of Mixedwood studies. I think we've covered a lot of them, but there are others. So they're a gold mine of quality data. Many of them that I've talked about today still are in sufficiently good condition to allow remeasurement. We might wish to rationalize, we might wish to select what treatments we want to follow going forward, but they provide us with some good ideas, and they also provide us with some good ideas for design of new studies and for some other things we might try. Nice to have stands with a history where we understand the dynamics of the trees, we understand the sites, and we can see what's happening. We can also, these have been used and have more potential for use for testing things like remote sensing data collection options. So Mike, together with Kirk Johnson, has already done some work looking at using LiDAR and high-resolution aerial photography to measure plots and compared it to the PSPs at WESBOGY, the LTS, Judy Creek, and SCUP, as well as others. And we've embedded other studies like competitive interactions, monitoring annual growth, the crown and branch characteristics and wood quality, sort of piggybacked on these various long-term studies. So but there's also a need for new studies because there's new ideas out there, there's new things to try. There's alternative ways to manage mixed woods in a sustainable way. So I thank you for your attention. This has been a whirlwind tour of a lot of stuff, but if there is time, or if you wish, we can stick around. Mike and I can stick around for a while to answer questions. Thank you.